Brexit delivered on its promise to transform British economics, but here's the question. Did it change for the better? Take a look at this graph. It tracks public opinion from 2016 to 2024, asking a simple yet revealing question. In hindsight, do you think Britain was right or wrong to leave the EU? As of August 2024, 54% of respondents said leaving the EU was the wrong decision. That's a stark reversal from 2016, when 51% believed Brexit was the right choice. The shift is impossible to ignore, and it begs the question: why has public confidence in Brexit crumbled so dramatically? For many, it's simple. The promises of prosperity and opportunity made by the Leave campaign never materialized. Instead, Brexit left a trail of economic turbulence, with entire industries hit hardest by its ripple effect. What started as Brexit has now turned into regret. But regret isn't just about opinions, it's about numbers. In this video, we'll uncover the billion-pound mistakes that defined Brexit, revealing which industries have paid the steepest price and how the UK economy is now affected. Let's talk about it. What could be worse for a business than uncertainty? And what could have been more uncertain than Brexit? In 2024, the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, stated that the cost of Brexit to the UK's economy was £140 billion. In his speech at Mansion House, London, he also stated that London's economy has shrank by more than £30 billion. His speech came with a grave realization. Something has to be done, and it needs to be done as soon as possible. If things were allowed to continue the way they had, more than £300 billion is expected to be wiped off the value of the UK's economy by 2035, and more than £60 billion wiped off London's economy altogether. Industries that have been hit the hardest in the aftermath of the UK leaving the EU include the hospitality industry, the servicing industry, farming and agriculture businesses, and altogether the industries that were heavily reliant on migrant labour. Mass migration from the East began the early to mid-2000s after the eastern expansion of the EU. This expansion welcomed nations such as Romania, Poland and Bulgaria into their union, allowing them to make use of free movement. That is, not only is a citizen from a member nation allowed to freely move between member states, but they're also granted certain rights in that nation. Take a look at this graph. It displays the number of Polish nationals who were resident in the United Kingdom from 2008 through 2021. The number of Polish migrants in the country has been on a steady increase since its accession in 2003. Notably, the number reached an all-time high in 2017 before steadily dropping in succeeding years. The most significant drop came between 2020 and 2021. That is, when the UK formally withdrew from the EU. Brexit had called for an end to freedom of movement and mass migrations into the UK. These protests were brought on by the UK's growing cost of living crisis, housing limitations, and growing unemployment, all of which were attributed to mass migration. But as the graph just showed, Polish migrants got the message and were on their way back to Poland or elsewhere after Brexit. The British public got what they wanted. Now what? A report carried out by Oxford University's Migration Observatory showed that the number of EU employees working in the British hospitality sector dropped by 25% between June 2019 and June 2021. New restrictions for EU citizens wishing to come and live and work in the UK means that the talent pool has reduced in size. Now, unless you were already living and working in the UK before it left the EU citizens will only be able to work here if they have skilled work visas, and applicants must now show they have a job offer from an approved employee sponsor to be able to apply. The new rules mean it's not impossible for EU citizens to work in the hospitality industry, but the additional red tape and costs involved made it a much more expensive and time-consuming process for both employers and potential employees. Additionally, the sector's exclusion from being classified as skilled labour under immigration policies has exacerbated staffing shortages. In 2021, the UK's largest listed pub group, Mitchells & Butlers, reportedly lost 9,000 of its 39,000 staff since Brexit. D&D, The owners of more than 40 upmarket restaurants, including La Pointe de la Tour and Coq d'Argent, lost 400 out of a total of 1,300 UK workforce in the aftermath, and Pizza Express was reportedly short 1,000 staff members. The hospitality industry had predicted this. Take a look at this figure. It shows how the pool of workers in the hospitality sector was expected to go down after the freedom of movement ended. More than 30% of hospitality workers across the UK in 2020 were believed to have come from Europe pre-Brexit, and that rises to more than half of those employed in London. The graph highlights how this sector in particular was heavily reliant on migrant labour without it losing its money. The hospitality sector, along with every other sector, works as a driver of the economy. However, after Brexit, many businesses have had to report shortfalls because of limited staff. This could have been the perfect opportunity for Britons to take up the vacancies left behind, something they have been advocating for. However, according to the Office for National Statistics, job vacancies increased to 862,000 in April to June 2021, surpassing pre-pandemic levels. 102,000 of these vacancies were in the hospitality sector, a rise of 12.1% in 2021. In 2022, surveys revealed a shortfall of around 460,000 EU workers, only partially offset by the arrival of approximately 130,000 non-EU workers. Why didn't Britons take up these jobs? Hospitality labour is barely ever glamorous, often with lower wages than the average. The sector argues that it lacks government funding to raise wages for its employees. Likewise, people aren't exactly lining up to work for restaurants, pubs, and such either. But do you know who were? Migrants. Every sector was affected. For instance, the transport and warehousing sector lost 128,000 EU workers, 8% of its workforce. Likewise, the wholesale and retail sector saw a 3% decline with 103,000 fewer workers, and hospitality and food experienced a 4% reduction with 67,000 fewer workers. Manufacturing, construction, and administrative roles also faced notable losses. Did you know that several decades ago, back in 2005, the United Kingdom Better Regulation Task Force found that red tape reforms could save the average citizen £16 billion in tax money? That could have amounted to 1% of the nation's GDP. That being said, many economists believe that decades later, the United Kingdom played a role in covering its supply chain in the same red tape. Red tape refers to excessive bureaucracy to formal rules and procedures that do nothing more than slow down or otherwise complicate processes. In this case, we're referring exclusively to the supply chain process. One notable workaround would be the EU's pride and joy, the single market. Regarded as one of its most significant achievements, the single market is designed to eliminate barriers to trade, mobility, and businesses across member states. The obvious way in which it does this is by eliminating the red tape, thereby making trade a seamless process. Before 1993, when the single market was introduced, companies operating across the EU faced a horde of national laws, customs procedures, and administrative hurdles, which significantly increased costs and complexities. These complexities were narrowed down to common regulations. In effect, they replaced national standards. Now EU member states have to operate under the same trade framework if they wish to trade in the single market. While the single market is far from being free and clear of all red tape, it does a sufficient job in making trade more profitable. Naturally, at the time of Brexit, one of the reasons why the actual withdrawal of the UK from the EU took longer than anticipated was because the government wanted to find a way to maintain free and clear trade with the EU. To put this into perspective, let's take a look at this graph. The graph shows the result of a poll where people were asked if they would accept free movement again if it meant being a part of the single market. Remember, one of the most contentious topics at the time of the referendum and even today in the UK is immigration. The results showed that 57% of Britons, 6 in 10, would happily make that trade, whereas 22%, 1 in 5, would not. Brexit came as a foreseeable disruption. That's because long before the United Kingdom actually left the Union, economists warned how it would impact the UK's economy. Of those economists, there were a few who were a part of the Leave campaign. They argued that while Brexit would create a supply chain shock undoubtedly, it was grossly being misrepresented by the Remain group to cause mass hysteria. In effect, it was chalked down as nothing that the UK couldn't recover from. Evaluer decided to test that theory in 2022 by surveying over 300 procurement leaders in the nation. The inclusion criteria for this sample population were those decision-makers who had 1,000 or more employees and generated revenues greater than £50 million. The results were quite eye-opening. Businesses believed that Brexit was having a bigger impact on supply chains than the war in Ukraine, rising energy costs, and COVID-19. The reapplied red tape meant that 28% of UK businesses lost revenue within a year of Brexit taking effect, with these businesses estimating an average drop in revenue of about 18%. Likewise, businesses claimed that supply chain disruption had also resulted in products arriving late, resulting in fines, and at least 64% claimed it had damaged their reputation as credible businesses. Moreover, 80% of UK businesses say that events such as Brexit, COVID-19 and the war in Ukraine have left supply continuity on life support. 69% of UK businesses were concerned that more supply chain disruption will put suppliers out of business, while 51% fear they will go out of business. A further 83% said the disruption had also slowed down their ability to innovate and develop new products. But wait, wasn't Brexit a foreseeable disruption? That is, shouldn't Boris Johnson and co. have found a way to mitigate the damage that Brexit would cause? Despite the fact that it would have caused some disruption, whether they liked it or not, shouldn't the UK government have worked out a deal that ensured these disruptions were hiccups rather than mass earthquakes? That's what the Trade and Cooperation Agreement was for, but did it deliver on what it was supposed to? Boris Johnson stepped up to the plate after Theresa May resigned as Prime Minister as a champion of the Leave campaign. He entered the Parliament with a clear goal in mind: make Brexit a reality. It's important to understand that his predecessor, May, has also been working on turning Brexit into a reality during her tenure. From 2016 through 2019, however, May was often criticised for not making Brexit happen fast enough. But the former PM claimed that all she wanted was to get the UK the best deal possible. That's something that we need to touch on briefly before we talk about the Trade and Cooperation Agreement. What would have been the difference between a deal versus a no-deal Brexit? Brexit didn't happen in a day, clearly. After the referendum in 2016, the UK government evoked Article 50 of the Lisbon Treaty. This signalled the UK's official withdrawal process, and the country now began negotiations with the EU. What was really happening here was that both sides were working out a deal. The UK was obviously a pivotal member of the Union, and likewise, the country benefited greatly from its membership in the EU. There had been problems, but people on either side had come to accept a new normal that was now being disrupted. Working out a deal meant finding common ground, a way to mitigate those disruptions. There was also, of course, the option to exit the EU without coming to a negotiation. This would have been classified as a no-deal Brexit. In terms of trade, a no-deal Brexit would have left the UK and the EU trading on basic World Trade Organization terms, with tariffs and quotas imposed on goods. Customs delays, regulatory checks, and non-tariff barriers would have disrupted supply chains, particularly for food and medicine. Services, a significant part of the UK economy, would have faced even greater restrictions with no provisions for market access. Obviously, the UK knew that it was in their best interests to work out some form of formal agreement with the EU, something that would benefit the nation. Likewise, the EU sent a divorce bill, which was the amount that the former member had to pay up if it wanted to proceed with negotiations. It took a long time to come to terms, with meetings being carried out in London and Brussels, but eventually a deal was reached. Again, in terms of trade, the deal was with the TCA. Now, the TCA governs the relationship between the UK and the EU, but it differs from being a part of the single market. In 2016, Leave campaigners such as Boris Johnson had claimed that because of the strength of the UK economy and the need for EU countries to continue trading freely with the UK, Britain would be in a very strong position to get a deal that exempted the UK from free movement and single market regulations while allowing free access to the single market. Because the UK already complied with single market regulations, a UK-EU free trade deal on goods may be fairly straightforward. However, during negotiations, it became increasingly obvious that the EU was not about to give the UK the same access to the single market anymore. The argument was that it would infringe upon the rights of the member states that were owed free and clear access. Elsewhere, many experts believed that the EU's decision might have been a strategic one. They didn't want Eurosceptics in other member states to get the wrong idea that they could reap EU benefits without actually being a part of it. In any case, the TCA was signed and it was promised that the next best thing for the British public. And now on to the differences. The TCA is a free trade agreement that governs UK-EU relations. While it eliminates tariffs and quotas on most goods traded between the UK and the EU, it introduces significant new barriers that did not exist when the UK was part of the single market. Under the single market, trade is frictionless, with no customs checks, regulatory divergence, or rules of origin requirements. In contrast, the TCA introduces customs formalities and regulatory checks at the border. UK exporters to the EU now face compliance with rules of origin requirements to prove their products qualify for tariff-free trade. Additionally, regulatory checks on goods, particularly food and agricultural products, add delays and costs. In the single market, individuals can live, work, and study across member states with minimal bureaucracy. With the TCA, freedom of movement has ended. UK citizens wishing to work or live in the EU now need visas or permits, and EU citizens face the same restrictions in the UK. This change has disrupted industries reliant on mobile workforces such as healthcare, hospitality, and agriculture. Now, let's look at this graph. The TCA was never going to replace free access to the single market. However, it wasn't supposed to put undue strain on the UK trade either. Despite that, this graph shows that 7 in 10 Brits think Brexit has had a negative impact on the UK economy. 70% believe that Brexit has negatively impacted the economy the most, 55% think it's harmed future prospects for the country, and 54% believe it's damaged the UK's standing on the world stage. Everything has been affected. Brexit wasn't meant to be this harmful to the UK's economy, yet that's exactly what's happening. Economists have placed the blame on two things: rash decisions and unrealistic expectations. Many claim that the Leave group has advocated for withdrawal from the Union, not fully understanding the larger picture. And now, the obvious question becomes, was Brexit the right call? Despite the reasons that prompted the Great British withdrawal, some of which were valid, was it worth risking the UK's economy for?